a very, yeah, if you guys all want to click on OK or continue, that will help you keep going. But we have other board members on from the River Prairie group today. So I'm going to call on you if you introduce yourself and tell us your role. Jeff, why don't you go first?
Okay, I'm Jeff Garris. I'm the vice chair of the group.
And if you live in DuPage County, Jeff is one of
Yes.
our Forest Preserve commissioners.
Woohoo!
Who
Yeah,
we elected.
Yeah, I'm working on that one.
Yeah, Bob Barbieri, please.
Bob Barbieri, I'm the water monitoring project leader, and we test the local watershed for various contaminants throughout the year.
We appreciate it. And Kathy Frankie?
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kathy Frankie. I'm the secretary and I'm involved with the political committee and lobbying as well, which is two of our really super important functions.
Yeah. And let's have Linda Sullivan. Will you introduce yourself, please? If she can go off mute here. There you go. You look like Wilson, like the guy that looks over the fronts, you know. Okay, there you are.
Hi, I'm the political chair and the lobby chair for the group.
Yeah, we're very grateful. And I see friends from all over the state, and I'm so grateful that you're here today. Thank you. So for anybody who's new to River Prairie Group, in Illinois, the Illinois chapter, we have 14 groups, and River Prairie Group is one of those 14 groups. We are DuPage County. We have a number of ongoing activities. You heard Bob mentioned our water monitoring. We do the West Branch, the East Branch of the DuPage River, Salt Creek, and then we also do some other smaller tributaries and some lakes within the Forest Preserve system. So if you're interested in water monitoring, that's the person to talk to, and we can hook you up. I'll put my email in the chat, and if there's anything that you want to know more about, contact me and I'll steer you to the right person. We also do a restoration at the Churchill Woods, Glacial Ridge Forest Preserve, and a fellow who's not on right now, Bruce Blake, is our leader on that effort. Let's see, we do programs such as this and having guest speakers such as Tim. And thanks to the encouragement of my friend Wendy Vernon, who's on here today, we have decided to try and be consistent. Our programs will be the third Wednesday. And right this minute, I cannot tell you what's going on for February, but if you watch our calendar, it will be up there soon. And keep that date open because I'm sure you'll want to join us for something else that's very interesting. We also have a unique feature Sierra Club in general does, in that we endorse political candidates. And once they're endorsed, it's a very rigorous process. We work very hard to get them elected. And once they're elected, we knock on their door because we identify priority issues through the chapter that we want to help get passed within the Illinois legislature. So those are very important programs that we do here at Sierra Club in the DuPage area, and you're welcome to be involved in any and all of them. Any questions just on the general structure of our Sierra Club? I think most of you are familiar, but like to toot our horn. We'll go ahead and get ready for our program then. I'm going to introduce my friend, my colleague as a Sierra Club leader across the state. He is active from the Northwest Cook Group, Tim Milburn, and he's been involved with Sierra Club leadership things for quite some time. But the other thing about Tim that's really important is that he works in the clean transportation sector and has started his own company, which I'm sure he'll tell us more about. So we are very grateful that Tim is here to decode the alphabet of clean energy initiatives. And the other thing I'll just say is, no doubt we will have questions about what Tim is talking about. Let's put them in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat And Tim will have a presentation, and then we'll try to hit those questions towards the end of the program, okay? Thanks, Tim.
My turn?
Your turn, hit it.
Okay, thank you so much, Connie, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks, Jeff, for helping set this up and the River Prairie Group in general. And I see in person and by name, a number of familiar names and faces. And everybody else, I appreciate for attending tonight. I hope you learned something and enjoy it. It's a lot of stuff, and I'm going to go through these things quickly. So let me make sure, can you all see the first screen?
Yes.
So just as a starter, this is my house in Park Ridge. You can see the solar panels on the roof. They power my Chevy Volt with electrons. I actually have a wireless inductive EV charger in the garage. I've had this up for a year. It's about an 8 kilowatt system, so I've really enjoyed it. Sometime in November, our friend Peter Gore and I were talking about, wow, there's all this stuff coming out, especially in Illinois. And so I kind of just wonked out and said, I'm going to figure out some of the answers to these questions. So I kind of organized this presentation based on that. I also have basically it's an electric vehicle charging consulting business. I'm active in the Metropolitan Mayors as a consultant, the caucus as a consultant, and I'm also on the steering team of the DOE Chicago Area Clean Cities. So I'm kind of fully vested in electrification in particular and alternative fuels in general. So just for those that you are keeping track, I'm going to pour a lot of stuff like a fire hose at you. Hopefully some of it sinks in. But I'm going to provide the slides and the reference links because there's a lot of stuff. It's really the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to start out by kind of introducing, these are kind of my thoughts and my perceptions of kind of why we're here and where we need to go. And I'm making the climate crisis the centerpiece of this discussion. What we want to do is deal with the climate crisis, but we have to do it fairly to serve the society's energy, environmental, and societal demands. And that requires policies and programs, which is what we're going to talk about, because that's the only way you can mitigate the negative externalities and level the playing field and systematically and equitably advance these programs through disadvantaged communities. At the same time, you're jumpstarting clean energy solutions through smart incentives. But at the same time, we have to consider that the free market is critical to making this successful. And what's going to be happening in the next decade and next year is change. So change is required, and this is going to result in a change in the balance of power. So you get into politics, and a lot of education and consensus building are needed to be successful. So I'm going to start just kind of baseline some of the basics of climate change, do some framework on some of the policies and targets, measures, and the money involved, look at what we should be focusing on, and then look at next steps for all of us to consider. So going to the basics, we're all familiar with mitigation and adaptation. The programs we're talking about, we want to reduce and eliminate the causes of climate change in all these areas. At the same time, we want to have resiliency actions to manage results, because no matter what we do, we're going to have outcomes that, because we are where we are, we're going to have to manage things, and to the degree we do manage them, we can reduce this. And the classic CO2 versus time, this is the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere up until now. And the question is, what happens next? And right now is what we want to do is mitigate. We want to remove CO2 from the environment. And at the same time, we have to plan for adaptation. And to the extent, depending on where the curve goes, the higher the curve, the more we're going to spend and have to deal with adaptation. And conversely, if we can bring this down into control,
It's okay.
we will
Lay down.
reduce
You're
those
okay.
impacts.
Lay down. Here, come here. Mandy.
Whose dog is on the call?
Yeah, I'm going to ask that we all mute ourselves. Somebody has a Mandy, which sounds lovely, but if you would just mute yourself, then you can talk to Mandy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. And along the way, there's an opportunity as we go through this, as we all are aware of, to do a better job on the equity front when we make all these changes. So again, I want to emphasize that this is about climate change. And when we're saying we're going to target improvements in managing climate change, there's also opportunities to improve fairness, have other environmental impacts, economic incomes, impacts, as well as community income. So the whole idea, that we'll be talking about is environmental justice, more inclusion, transition from fossil fuels, accountability, all these different areas of environmental that we're all familiar with. There's a lot of economic opportunities through training and jobs placement. This is going to bring a lot of money into Illinois in particular. And then another key element is we really do need to engage our communities. And I think the Sierra Club does an excellent job of doing that, which means engaging our municipal leadership and other public entities, getting citizens involved, business community, and then a lot of education. So that's just sort of the background. I introduce here the Conference of Parties in number 26, which was in Scotland in November, so COP26. And I've taken, I don't know, a few thousand pages and put it into one slide. There is a lot more information. There's a link here for those that are interested. But basically, at the top of the globe, we're looking for this net zero by 2050, manage this 1.5 degree rise, which we're already in path to exceed it, primarily through the use of fossil fuel reduction, addition of renewables, energy efficiency, but also do it while we're protecting communities and ecosystems. And to do that, we're going to have aggressive plans to reduce greenhouse gases. And each country's been asked now to have a plan to target what they're going to be like in 2030 for the next COP. That includes defining and deploying resilience strategies. While we're doing that, we're going to have measures and accountability, collaboration, education again, and generate economic opportunity. So I'm not going to go any deeper into that. There's some other slides at the end of the presentation which drill down a little bit on some of the COP. The other good thing is a year ago, the United States was not in the Paris Agreement. We now are. And we now have, so the IPCC is an International Panel on Climate Change, which is the one that kind of manages the Paris Agreement. So now 97% of the countries have signed on. There's a few countries in the Middle East that are still haven't ratified it, but essentially this is a global commitment. One thing that I found interesting as I went through the policies from top to bottom is the IPCC, the Paris Agreement, has kind of set the stage at this global level, but it really has now with the federal legislation that has passed and some that are pending, the Build Back Better. They're following those same goals. It's passed down to the state of Illinois through the Climatic Jobs Act, which we'll talk about, and then it's passed down into the region. Which the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning is a big part of in terms of managing and the funding programs, as well as the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. And from there, we have a couple of programs I'm going to talk about. One is the Greenest Region Compact, and the other is the Climate Action Plan. So basically, you've got stuff flowing all the way down. Some money and programs come from the state of Illinois that go into local governments. Others go to businesses and utilities and some other stakeholders. And then we have people like ourselves here, volunteers and municipal green groups and educators and experts that interact with local governments. So again, I just want to point out local governments are kind of central to this whole set of players. Another observation as I went through this is, as I said, the goals flow down, they really do. But the closer you get to home, the more specific they are, the more targeted they are, as we'll talk about. So I want to go through and highlight some of the US policies, and I'm going to target this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA. So IJA was signed in November. It's a big bill. I pared it down into one page. It's 1.2 trillion over 5 years. Interesting thing is it's adding $550 billion over kind of what was the rate that we were spending before on these kinds of programs. So it's a significant commitment. It focuses at a national level on infrastructure. And what I'm going to talk about is the three in the green. These other areas are equally important, but I'm trying to stick to time and stick to climate focus. So I will talk about some of these in more detail, but there are other things I'm sure you've heard of on the news. There's, brownfield remediation and wastewater cleanliness and some special programs out west, and then getting broadband to everyone. So drilling down on the IJOB programs for energy environment. So basically what I have here is there's what the measure is, the 5-year plan for budget, and then a description. So there's a weatherization program, which is targeting reducing energy costs for low-income households. There's something called the SMART program, strengthening mobility and revolutionizing transportation. And it's tying into smart cities and autonomous and connected vehicles and the infrastructure, smart sensors, traffic grids, the air utility grids, trying to improve the efficiency of the transportation network. There's a program for carbon dioxide, transportation, infrastructure, finance, and innovation. Basically, it's to fund low pollutant emission vehicles for mass transit and things like carpools, and again, it's a greenhouse gas reduction. There's also something interesting. There are people for all sorts of batteries. The advent of the electric vehicle is going to create a lot more batteries. Also, energy storage for like solar. So and energy storage for like grid solar, grid renewable energy storage. We're going to have a lot of batteries. So we have to figure out how to manufacture it efficiently, how to recycle it effectively, not creating new problems. So there's a lot of studying and pilot projects are going to go in. There's an energy efficiency program, which it's tying into renewable energy across the country. I mentioned the brownfields. This is the Superfund type projects to get money back into that. And then there's a project to support hydroelectric. In the transportation world, they have a program for state and local grants for EV charging and alternative fuel infrastructure. Alternative fuels being like natural gas or propane. One of the requirements is these have to be publicly accessible, and the priorities for spending these monies are rural and low and moderate income communities, as well as multifamily dwelling areas with high density. There's a separate program that's twice the money, $5 billion. It's called the National Electric Vehicle Program. And the goal is to establish a national network of EV chargers. So to create ubiquity and remove range anxiety for those driving EVs. One of the things it's doing, it's going to be sited on what's called alternative fuel corridors, which are state-defined corridors, typically interstates, that say, we're saying this is alternative fuel corridor, and we want to have people who drive alternative fuel vehicles, including EVs, to be able to drive without range anxiety. There's a focus program on electric buses, and what they've done, they've grouped the vehicles and the supporting infrastructure into one program to support state and local projects. There's a program for buses in particular. And again, it's alternative fuel vehicles, and that not just the buses, but any of the other fleet vehicles that the school may have. There's a program for ports and ferries, including drays, trucks, and locomotives. There are also, everybody foresees that a lot of things are going to be moving in the electrification of medium and heavy duty trucks and plus the buses mentioned. So that's a big project. There's a lot of things to consider on both the charging side and the vehicle side. So the state wants to review and plan what we're going to do, and then presumably later they'll have a funding program to support it. The state is also, or the federal government has also targeted 500,000 EV charges in the US supported by these programs. So it's pretty aggressive. One other thing at the federal level, it's called the Justice 40 Initiative. It was actually one of the first things the Biden administration did. Basically, it's saying 40% of the overall benefits from federal investment in climate and clean energy are to be realized by disadvantaged communities. And it's a jobs program, infrastructure program. And this actually preceded IJA, but it's basically going to be kind of overlaid on some of the grants and incentive programs. If anybody wants more, there's a link here. And also, so there's so many different agencies and groups involved in IJA. So these links are live, and each of these groups have kind of their own take on these different programs associated with IJA for those that want to drill down. I didn't want to leave the Build Back Better Act out. I know we've all kind of got tired of hearing about it on the news, and today they're talking about breaking up the dining room set. But be that it may, I wanted to kind of differentiate it from the Infrastructure Act. This is targeting more at the individual, community, and business level versus a national grid, if you will. So they want to extend the tax credit for solar, wind, and electric vehicles. So tax credits. They want to, supply energy efficiency consumer rebates at a national level, which could supplant the Illinois ones. They want to support entrepreneurship in clean energy. They want to help homeowners weatherize their home. They want to provide financing mechanisms. They also want to focus on agriculture and rural clean energy. And they want to, like all these programs, training in innovation and equity. So it all has the same earmarks. We just don't know what's going to come out in terms of dollars and cents and details. So now moving on to Illinois, and I know we're all familiar with the Climatic Jobs Act, or CJA. It's an amazing bill. I've been reading it of late, and it actually is not putting me to sleep anymore. It's really quite an amazing compilation and a very complicated bill that actually works with all these cross-functional goals. So at the top of the pile, the goal is to create a lot of jobs in Illinois and do it with economic justice in mind, support renewable energy, provide kind of smart financing, improve energy efficiency, carbon-free power, electric transportation. A big one that was a concern is as we shut down these coal and natural gas power plants, we want to have a way of dealing with those people that are impacted. And another big one is the utilities are now held to account. There's tracking systems and they have to follow some new rules. There's also some things to say we're going to improve the grid, and there's a number of low-income relief programs. So again, kind of just summarize the key elements in CJA in these boxes, and I'll talk about them a little bit more. So it's another big bill. These green ones are the ones that really tie to climate that I'm going to focus on. Each of these is kind of has a header. So as we've kind of been talking about, and I've kind of highlighted the ones that are of interest, I think, to this group. Another thing that everywhere you got this, there's going to be metrics to tie into climate, looking at performance and financial metrics, and also what's happening in emissions, and establishing programs that hold people to account. So you set a program, you say you're going to do this, people are going to be watching. So I will talk about each of these, and this is kind of a good cheat sheet. So looking at each of those individually, those areas. So renewables, I know is a big one to the people on this call. The Renewable Energy program in Illinois has been increased from 230 million a year to 580. It's basically more than double, which this is a big deal. There's more money allocated on small solar, which is homeowners and behind the meter projects. Just for reference, the RECs can support up to 50% of a solar project costs. So it's a huge incentive for those considering it. A new one is battery storage. So if you tie this with distributed solar, the battery costs, they give you $250 to $300 per kilowatt hour of storage. This amount of energy you store, and it's based on the distributed, the rating of distributed solar. So I was been waiting for this because I want to put batteries in my basement to take on power when the sun's shining and I'm not using power. Then I can use it off peak and save money. There's a utility grant for smart inverters on distributed solar, and that's at $250 a kilowatt hour. And I'll talk a little bit more about community solar. That world has changed. I know many of you probably signed up for it. There's some special incentives to get consumers better deals, and also maybe engage local government. So looking at the renewable energy, kind of the high level. So we're looking to make Illinois 100% renewable energy through decarbonization. And along with that, we get a lot of clean air benefits. The target is right now in the legislation is 40% renewable energy by 2030 and 50 by 2040. And that's what this curve is showing. The red at the bottom here, that's what we have done. Like up until 2019, we weren't doing much towards achieving our renewable portfolio standard goals. Fiji kicked in and we actually did make a dent, and the green is CEJA. So 2030 here, we've got this, it should be 40% anyways. And then from there, we're going to targeting 50% by 2040. And presumably after that, we'll target 100%. Another part of this, because the more renewable, we have this irregular resource, we're going to need energy storage and new power distribution infrastructure support, which is, you know, part and parcel to what they're doing. For those of you who are familiar with the long-term renewable resources procurement plan, the LTRP, it was revised in August and they were waiting for CEJA. Now CEJA's passed. They had a draft that came out last week, which is under review, which will set some of the rates for the different categories of RECs, of renewable energy credits. And this will address the solar cliff, which was a concern that the RECs were going to go away and nobody would put in solar. That's been fixed. There was to have been 10 million RECs by the end of last year for new projects. That has been activated. There's 45 million RECs to be delivered annually by the end of 2030 for new projects, which are going to be 55% solar, 45% wind. This is a ratepayer funded program. And unlike what we had in the past, these programs are not subject to sweeps, administrative charges, or chargebacks. And good news for residents, the small distributed renewable RECs are now available as of sometime in December, which is part of the legislation. So for those people in the solar business, residential, they're kind of back in business. The adjustable block program, which is part of that resource procurement plan, there's a range of new programs as well as kind of a boost to the old ones. On the left, you've got the allocation of the REC funding. The small or rooftop solar is now 25 kilowatts. It was 10 kilowatts in Fiji. Large rooftop solar is gone up to 5 kilowatts or 5 megawatts, and it was 2. Community solar, there's going to be a similar program which will also go up to 5 megawatts. And this is under Fiji. Community solar basically ended up being a lot of 2 megawatt solar farms that got sucked up by a handful of companies through the lottery process. 900 people applied and like 30 people received, got picked, and that even got winnowed down further. So part of the new program is to have these carve outs here on the left, different percentages. So one's going to focus on schools. So schools that want to have solar will have a rec pool that's unique to them. Similarly, what I like here is this community-driven community solar. I used to call it community solar. When I first heard about community solar, I thought, oh, that means my town can get solar. Well, it ended up, community solar ended up was a community of people, and they had a solar farm out in the farmlands. This you can do like in your community. It's a carve out. It's going to be another a different set of rec structures, but it's going to allow municipalities or community groups to participate in community solar closer to home. And then there's going to be an equity eligible contractor solar. So it's basically you're dealing with low income contractors that can take advantage of a favorable rate of the rec. So each of these will have a different rec rate. And for those of you who don't know, the rec rate is based on the number of megawatt hours that are generated by a given solar array in a year. So you saw mine, I get about 7 megawatt hours per year. So I get paid for 7 recs, and in the small rooftop solar, I get 15 years of recs up front. And that has been held. So I get that upfront that paid for about a third of my investment. And so those will be available for more of these projects. I'm not sure. I know the small generated is going to get them, and these other smaller new projects are going to get them upfront 15 years worth. So that's a big deal when you're making that initial investment. In the past, when they did this, you had to get new recs like every year, and there was no guarantee, and the prices changed. So this locks you into a rate, and they give you 15 years worth of it up front. There's some new things for energy efficiency, but it largely follows what was in play. So they've increased the amount of funding, and they've got a special pool for low income life safety issues. So there's been some stories of low income housing that burned down because their furnaces were in disarray. So the idea is they'll provide some free money or rebates. The targets are now 21.6 and 16% for the large and small utilities to reduce the amount of energy consumed compared to 2015. They're also looking for those that have gotten an Energy Star appliance, be it electrical or natural gas. They're extending the program for 10 years, which includes all weatherization, hot water heaters, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, lighting, and other Energy Star appliances. And there's some socioeconomic carbon. So low income and communities of color will get special consideration. Another thing that's new is called stretch codes. So every municipality in the state has to, except for Chicago, has to follow energy efficiency codes that are passed down from the state to the municipalities. And they come out every 3 years. There was a 2021 code that was released last year. Communities that are up to speed now are probably on 2018. We'll go on to 2021 soon. But in 2024, they're going to have the stretch code program, which says the local government could say, we wanted to have more stringent codes. We want more energy efficient buildings. And this applies to new construction in particular. Another interesting one, for low income communities, equitable energy communities, they can finance energy upgrades through the utility bill. So they can be basically creating a loan on new energy efficiency products. Decarbonization was a really big one. And I know a lot of you were on some of these calls where we were fighting this and trying to do the best we could to shut down coal power plants. I'll explain this, but there is a fossil fuel plant closure schedule. In addition, the state has committed to study the best path forward for Illinois to monetize greenhouse gases. So we don't know how that's going to come out, but there's a commitment to figure it out. And also they are supporting the nuclear power plants for another several years, which is saving 2,000 Illinois jobs. This is the timeline. So starting by the end of 2027, there's 7 private coal plants that will be shut down. By 2030, the rest of the private plants will go. There's an oil plant, etc. We're targeting closing down the dirtiest plants in EJ or equity communities. And then there's, outside of that, they want a reduction in emissions of 50%. In 2035, all the remaining private gas plants in equity communities is closed, and the private gas plants have to reduce their carbon emissions by 50%. By 2037, it would look like you have to cut emissions by half. By 2040, the big power plants have to close, and by 2045, they all have to close. So this is a big deal in Illinois. And the presumption is that it's going to be displaced by renewable. On the transportation side, there's some really interesting things. There were no provisions in FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act, and now there's a flurry of things associated with electrification of transportation. There's a target to have 1 million electric vehicles. That's by 2030. There's a grant program up to 4,000 per EV. They're also looking at EV infrastructure grants to pay for up to 80% of the stations. The kind of overarching program is called the EV Act or Electric Vehicle Act. And there's a sub-program called Beneficial Electrification, or BE. And that's dealing with some programs, including grants and financing for EV charging projects. And that's integrated with DER, which is Distributed Energy Resource Programs, which I'll talk about in a second. Same thing as everything else. There's a focus on impacted or eligible communities, focus on medium duty and heavy duty vehicles, especially those that serve eligible communities or travel through eligible communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So Electric Vehicle Act, IPA is going to run the show. And the other kind of nuance is the EV Act is tied to something called the Beneficial Electrification Plan. And they're working now. I was actually at a call before this. There's workshops that are defining this program. And the goals of the program are to identify the benefits of EV adoption and the barriers to adoption, recommendations for transportation electrification, and letting the utilities know what their role will be. And we're starting with the first step in the process here is called the Electric Vehicle Rebate Act. And so starting in July, the EV owner a new EV purchase can get $4,000 a rebate, comes in about 60 days later, then it decreases over per the schedule. You have to be an Illinois resident. It's funded with user fees, your license fees. There may be other funding sources that come through, perhaps federal, perhaps others. There's another program that ties in EV charging, and I want to kind of mix the beneficial electrification with the EV Act here. So they call this distributed or community energy projects. There's a rebate which says that if you put in something which, so some people put in solar, some people will add EV charging in the same project. It might be energy storage, demand management controls, smart inverters, things like vehicle to grid integration. And whatever the rating is, there's a $250, at least $250 per kilowatt rating incentive that could go up. There's also, each of these components may have their own incentives, and there may be additive incentives. So if you put together multiple components of this, there may be supplemental grants. And all this is to be determined by these ICC workshops, the Illinois Commerce Commission. In parallel, there's an effort to optimize the grid. So we're going through all this effort to integrate all these distributed energy resources. Well, we need to figure out how to move those electrons around smartly and keep the load on the grid at reasonable levels. So the ICC again is tasked to study and plan for transmission grid upgrades as required and as tied to energy storage, renewable energy locations, and tied to, if this is underwritten by climate impacts and integrated with renewables and this distributed energy resources such as energy storage. There's also an interconnection working group, which is looking at all these things and kind of how we're going to make it work effectively together. So we are still in some level, we're in planning. And then there's a smart grid group, which is looking at the advanced metering infrastructure, and it should be Internet of Things and smart devices to manage new technology. So we have all these new tools, software and hardware, that we can optimize the integration of all these different technologies. So for those that are familiar with beneficial electrification, the definition is you want to reduce greenhouse gas and pollution while reducing the cost of energy for consumers. And that sounds ambitious at first, but if we can get rid of the fossil fuels and use renewables, we're not paying for fuel now. This can create cost savings by optimizing the grid and reducing peak demand by better allocating electrical use. You can improve this load grid shape and maybe shut down some demand power plants. And you can also align electrical uses to with renewable generation. So I mentioned this before, the ICC is holding workshops. They're going to be done at the end of next month. Then they submit this report to the utilities. Then utilities have until July to come up with their plan, and then they would implement it in January. So just to drill down a little bit, the grid load optimization component, they want to use EVs and EV charging to provide grid operational flexibility. So think of the EVs as a storage device. You put a lot of them together, you now have a small power plant in effect. The other thing is, if you can encourage people to charge off peak or to use energy storage during peaks, you can change the rates to encourage people to charge off peak and to consume on peak. And there's also demand management response programs which tie to this. These things can be automated, so things can turn on and off based on the electrical cost curve. But the goal is to get people educated to know best times of day to use electricity to keep the load off the grid. Part of the EV charging incentives and financing programs, they're going to have focus areas on medium duty, heavy duty vehicles for transit, plus public and private fleets, school bus, and then targeting a range of low income applications. This will be part of the beneficial electrification plan, in addition to some of the other incentives that are available for EV charging. The other important thing here is, if we're going to be spending public money to site EV chargers, the idea is we'll pick some priority areas, such as high areas of high population, workplace areas, and also a focus on low income communities. Another logical thing is you don't want to put too many in one location. You want to give some kind of awareness of filling in spatial gaps. And then also, if we're going to be integrating renewables with transportation electrification, you want to put them close together. You can better manage the grid and reduce the costs. So the other kind of counterparts, so now you have a new EV and you want to put in an EV charger. There's some EV charging incentives. Some are coming out in July. And right now, it said it's going to be up to 80% of the cost of installation of the charging station. What's included in that 80% is not defined. What they call make ready, which includes like the conduit and wiring, and maybe panels and maybe transformers. So this has to be clarified. There will be some priority carve outs for low income and public and private and different use cases. So this 80% may be the maximum. And the funding is expected to come out of the 2019 capital budget, $70 million. And the VW mitigation funding, which could be somewhere up to $70 million, that hasn't been defined either. The second leg of this is the beneficial electrification EV charging programs. And so this is tied to this workshops I mentioned in the recommendations. The same thing, we're going to have some carve outs, the same kind of targets, same issues with what make ready means. But the one thing that's going to happen is a lot of these are going to be tied to these distributed energy resource programs. So ideally, you're doing energy storage and EV charging and solar in one program, and this will be driven by ratepayer funding. Also in the EV charging incentives, The state corridor, the alternative vehicle corridor, is going to get some planning support and funding. Example, where to put DC fast chargers. There can be some money to help plan. The state fleets, we're going to get EV charger funding, and there may be federal money. So just want to go drill down one level on the distributed energy resources. So I mentioned this earlier. So you could put together, you know, project like I've got a drawing of here, just kind of all in. So $250 to $300 per kilowatt for energy storage, $250 for a smart inverter. You got EV charger incentives I just talked about. You've got renewable energy incentives like the RECs and that metering, and tax credits perhaps. And then you can use these ratepayer benefits, time use rates, or vehicle to grid payment plans where you actually are exchanging electrons with the grid. And that means that you can actually get paid to be on the grid during certain times of the day. And there may be additive solutions if you do all or some of these. There also is going to be financing programs to help opportunities get developed. One last thing, this is outside of CEJA. This is a bill that passed in November. It's called Reimagining Electric Vehicles in Illinois Act, or the REV Act. And it's a tax incentive program to encourage Illinois EV manufacturing, which includes the vehicles, the charging stations, and any automotive part manufacturers such as batteries. The incentives tied to creating new jobs or retaining employees, training expenses, and construction wages, and building materials for new facilities. So this is just the governor has said, I want EVs in my EV business in Illinois. There's an aggressive push that'll be supported through different forms of subsidies and financing programs. And this is not climate, but it's really important is the whole package of just transition. There's a wide range of programs for starting to get people interested, and there's a screening program, and then there's a full apprenticeship program that will be supported through the whole state to get people up and running on being EV charger installers or solar panel installers or energy efficiency equipment installers and anything in that range. And those businesses that want to get started, there's going to be support for financing to get businesses up and running or boosted. Any communities that want to get involved, any communities that have had fossil fuel power plant shutdown or coal mining operations, there's some programs to assist those communities to kind of get through it and get on the other side on there and stand up, including the retraining of displaced workers. Another interesting one is the state is offering financial support for groups or communities that want to undertake comprehensive sustainability planning. So if your municipality wants to do something, there may be some financial support. One of the other things that came out of a lot of, I guess, long nights is prevailing wage is going to be required for all clean energy projects except for residential and houses of worship under 100 kilowatt. There's an equity standard that says 10% of the renewable energy projects have to be done by equity eligible persons or contractors, and that's going to go up to 30% by 2030. And there's a provision that says that a consumer has the right to generate, consume, and deliver excess renewable energy to the distribution grid at a fair price and reduce the use of electricity obtained from the grid, and allows them also to install energy storage. This may seem self-evident, but this is a provision that if it wasn't there, I'm not sure how the utilities might react. So I'm getting closer to home, and I'm now in northeastern Illinois. Many of you are probably familiar with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. It is the regional metropolitan planning organization for Cook and the Collier counties. They do a lot of studies. They define future plans for supplying the needs of goods and the services of the region in the world of transportation, housing, economic development, open space, the environment, and other quality of life issues. For those who are interested, there's some really good documents here in this On to 2050 program, which is a plan to get from now to 2050. CMAP gets a lot of money from the federal government that they use for studies and also for managing some incentive funds. And much of the IJA funding that will come to Illinois will go through CMAP, in particular for congestion mitigation, air quality, other programs, especially focused on climate mitigation and adaptation programs. So another thing that I think many of you are familiar with is something called the Greenest Region Compact. It's a program run by the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. Edith Macra is the director, and I think she may be on the call tonight. Thank you for being here. Basically, the MMC, through this environmental group, they focus on environmental programs and look at outcomes both at a municipal and a regional level, and try to communicate what local actions can be taken for clean energy, water, smart use of energy, transportation, waste, and pollution, and also sustainable landscapes. And what communities have done across the region is sign this GRC resolution. Many of your communities have probably done so. I'm not going to read this, but it basically says we, the community of X, we're going to be sustainable. And basically there's some programs that are behind this resolution that say we're going to do the following. So right now 140 municipalities have signed, and it basically sets up a nice shopping list of sustainability strategies and actions focused for municipalities, and it provides a framework that it's basically, this is an Excel spreadsheet that allows communities to, in my opinion, go shopping. I was involved in a project in Park Ridge where we took these, there was over 1,000 ideas in 10 areas, and we pared it down to 50 some ideas for Park Ridge and created a sustainability plan, which included the spreadsheets as well as a written counterpart. So it basically, City of Park Ridge, they signed on the GRC, they took on the sustainability plan, and they're now rolling it out as the, in the city. And there's a whole bunch of cities have done the same kinds of things. Another thing about GRC is that the regional, state, and local and global goals, we're trying to have an alignment there. The GRC also leverages incentives. The mayor's caucus can provide resources and help the educational process, again, focusing on municipalities. These are the framework areas. Climate at the top, and I won't read through all these, are probably familiar to most of you, common sense, but it's a really good program that allows you to organize at a municipal level what to do, and it's typically done by volunteer groups to get things going. Here's an example of the energy framework, and this is basically energy efficiency. So this is the goal. It says we're going to use efficient energy. And then this allows you to look at some objectives, and then you've got some strategies, and it's a useful tool to organize your thoughts towards developing a sustainability plan. And again, there's over 1,000 of these little line items in the framework. The other thing that the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has done an awesome job on, it's called the Climate Action Plan for the Chicago region. It was released last fall. It was done in concert with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. I always have this a mouthful. NOAA. And interesting thing is, so this has been going on across the world. In Europe, was kind of started up by the European Union, and there's a group called the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. I'll just call them a covenant, that are kind of organized it. And so the MMC became selected as one of 4 communities called Metro Scale Climate Leaders, Denver, Chicago, Kansas City, and Washington, DC. So from a global sense, 4 urban areas got selected, and we were lucky to be one of them. And this was organized, kind of the results in a booklet, which is available. The link's in this presentation. There's something called the U.S. Climate and Resilience Toolkit and NOAA. They're kind of federal resources, and Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning was intimately involved in the program. So they went through a lot of listening sessions, talked to a lot of people before they put the document together. Similar to the resolution for GRC, there's a resolution for the climate action plan. So the GRC resolution kind of was just a statement of we're going to be sustainable, let's focus on sustainability more broadly. This sets specific targets for mitigation and adaptation and sets specific objectives too. And this is part of the document. The idea is a mayor or board or someone will sign on to this, similar to the GRC, but this is basically saying we're going to meet these targets. At this point, there are 28 communities that have signed up and 4 councils of governments plus the MWRD, that's about Waste Resource District. I got that wrong. Anyways, you may see your community here, you may not. If not, I would suggest you think about talking to them about this. So just to go quickly over the goals here. So climate mitigation goals, there's mitigation, adaptation. The idea is that at a community level, you want to be finding ways to reduce GHG emissions 50% from 2005 levels and increasing from 65 and 80% over the next 30 years. High level goals, but if you don't set the targets, you'll never reach the goals. And basically, this is an important one. We have to start demonstrating leadership to reduce emissions, which is a lot of what SIEGE is about. The decarbonization, building energy improvements, clean energy policies, decarbonize transportation, reduce the amount of vehicle miles, manage water and waste sustainably, and sustain ecosystems to sequester carbon. So CEJA is doing a lot of this. We still need more. On the adaptation side, basically the targets follow a timeline as well. The first step is to say, as a government, a municipal government, is we are going to kind of think from a resilience standpoint, which is kind of the adaptation. We're going to be planning accordingly. Then you start moving into the region. So if you're talking about flooding, you're talking about neighboring communities and aligning your resiliency policy. And then by 2050, it's kind of part of the culture and everybody's doing it. The objectives, again, at this point is education and getting people involved, dealing with equity inclusion, like everything else, collaborate and build capacity related to resiliency. I think the really big one is, again, a municipality has to be thinking about policies and plans and budgets. Flooding is the big one most municipalities talk about, but there are other things that need to be looked at, and they need to be thinking they're going to have to spend money now to save money later. And also that impacts the municipal operations and how they're spending their money again in anticipation of changes in climate. Similar to the framework in GRC, there's a framework in the Climate Action Plan. And basically you have a series of strategies. And over here, you're looking at which category you're looking at it from a resilience standpoint. In this case, this is looking at heat and health, flooding in homes, stormwater infrastructure, flooding and transportation, drought, water, air pollution, and health. So what areas you're targeting. And then if you blow up that first one, you've also looking at, what would the role of the municipality be? Where are you? How much? What kind of resources you're going to need? What partners you're going to need to be involved with, and what are you looking to do? So this, again, it's a really good tool. It's very comprehensive, and I think communities can look at it and say, this is what we want to do in 2022, but we can be looking to the future. So on the community climate action plan itself, the first thing is to get municipalities involved. There's the mayor's caucus is going to be updating the Greenish Region Compact. I think there's going to be kind of a harmonization of these two areas. They need to raise funds. This is a big effort. Getting more partners involved in talking about regional implementation. So I want to revisit this graphic that we started with and bring in this Global Covenant group. And their goal here is to measure and monitor climate action plans. So if somebody's implementing a plan, like anything else, if you don't measure it, you don't know if you're making progress. And the idea is that they're going to set global targets for various things. They're going to go through the covenant, the global covenant. Then in this case, it's going through the Climate Action Plan through the Mayor's Caucus and CMAP. And then it's going to be going to local governments. And the idea is when we start measuring, those targets get reported back up so that we can look at things regionally and internationally. At this point, there isn't a strong tie kind of up the chain in the US. There is part of this US Climate Resilience Toolkit, and NOAA is involved, but there isn't kind of a direct link through all these measures and a comprehensive solution. And I think over time, that's kind of going to be a next step, is to get kind of a full flow up and down the chain here to make these measurements valuable, but we're just getting started. I've had other people say, what's the difference between GRC and the CAP when it comes to tracking and reporting? And this is an example on energy. The top one is what's in the framework in GRC. The bottom one is in the CAP. They're similar. So again, I think there's going to be a harmonization right now. If you're dealing with kind of general sustainability plans, you want to focus on the GRC framework. If you have a climate plan, you'll be focusing more on the CAP. But at some point, again, they're going to have to be harmonized. And I know the caucus is working on how to best do that. A couple other programs that the Mayor's Caucus is involved with. One is Soul Smart. Some of your communities may have gotten involved in this. This is basically a streamlining process, which involves a solar webpage to make it easier for people to put solar in. There's a scoring and recognition system. There's about 35 communities that have participated. And there's a counterpart program called EV Ready, which is trying to do the same thing for electrification. So for putting in EV chargers, how do you streamline the permitting and inspection process and educate people? Program started in 2020 where we created a checklist with these various categories to try to help municipalities start the planning process, and a document to help them understand all the parameters. And we're hoping to roll this out this year, and in terms of actually implementing a program for a range of municipalities. This is a lot of stuff, but for my own curiosity, I went back through all the stuff we just talked about, and I said, well, is there a similarity between the global, the federal, state, and then CAP 2021 on all these different programs? And the answer was, yeah, everybody's kind of trying to do the same thing, at different scales. So if you want to look at this more closely, you can get a copy of the slides. And just to bring things back to why we're here, this is talking about the importance of climate action. So if we don't do anything, this is the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, or the amount of emitted each year. Basically, it's going to just climb, and it's just climate change will get worse. But if we do all these things we've just talked about, improving energy in the buildings and power and transportation, et cetera, all these little bits can be reduced. And this is sort of the glide path, trying to get to 80% by 2050. And the goal is that along the path, we're going to have innovation that will allow us to drop some or all of these down to get to a net zero target by 2050. Just mentioned innovation. Many of you seen this curve. Solar PV cost history. Since 2014, it's gone from, this was showing 60 cents down to 30 cents. It went in half by 2018 in terms of dollar per watt. Grid story. This is a forecast showing it's going crazy, or expected to. The different colors are different countries. And then on the energy storage costs, which drive the cost of the vehicle compared to an internal combustion vehicle, this blue line here is showing that when you get to this point, which they're saying is 2023, 2024, soon, when we reach parity, that the cost of an electric vehicle will be the same as a counterpart internal combustion engine. So innovation is an important part, but we also need to change the culture. So last slide till I get to the what we can do. There's so many things going on, and I want to make sure that we're thinking of, as we leverage this, we need to find ways to be successful. And in my opinion, you need to have economic viability. There has to be a business case. There has to be energy equity. There has to be an environmental outcome that's better, and it has to maintain or improve quality of life. This all has to happen together. And for all the programs that have been presented or are being discussed, they don't follow necessarily the same path for all these things. The technology maturity is different. The level of education and the measures deployed are different. So we need to keep in mind on what makes the most sense for a given program. And lastly, I just want to talk about what we or you can do. And I look at, we've kind of talked about this hierarchy. And down at the bottom is all of us as beneficiaries. At the international level, they're setting these high level targets and some money things. At the federal level, there's basically setting policies, rules, and providing some funding. The state level is much the same, with a good number of programs on top of that. Locally is where some interesting things start to happen. You've got codes and orders and permits, inspections. These are, it's the game rules. And also this is where the change has to occur and where community action has to occur, and which means collaboration, communication, and planning. And then as far as the beneficiaries, we're all going to be able or can take advantage of incentives. There's opportunities to learn and get new jobs. So there's a lot of benefits that are going to flow from this. But as some of you have heard, we're so far away from the global and what may really happen. As Greta said, it's sort of blah, blah, blah. And in my opinion, the action is local. And that's why I think having groups like this is really important, because you really need community action and leadership is what's going to drive the change. If we're going to mitigate and adapt to climate, it has to happen locally. And again, I'm harping on the municipalities because they're responsible for assuring compliance and safety. They have to deal with clean technologies for themselves and the public. They can be very helpful in supporting the education and collaboration processes. And so my suggestion is if you are inclined to involve your municipalities or spend time, get them to commit to these programs, the GRC, the CAP, EV Ready when it's ready. But a lot of this has to do with looking at, all the programs I just talked about, there's a lot. So municipalities and other public entities should study it and learn and figure out how to leverage the incentives of programs. And when the programs are available, take advantage. And also talk to your regional partnerships. And if to the extent you have local community colleges or even high schools, start getting people trained in clean energy jobs and help get the word out of all these programs to municipal staff, elected officials, as well as your residents, businesses, and other organizations. And as individuals, again, this is preaching to the choir with Sierra Club. Collaboration is central. Participate in these clean energy meetings. Let people know what you've learned. As I mentioned, signing on to these resolutions. Get involved, especially where you feel passionate. When you buy something, think sustainably. When you vote, support climate action. So with that, I'm going to end, and hopefully we've got some questions. Appreciate you going through the fire hose of acronyms and stuff.
All right, first off, thank you. Oh my gosh, everybody. Yay. I see a bunch of hands. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can all see each other, Tim? And give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay.
One real quick, I forgot to do one thing here. Let me, I just want to let you know at the end of the presentation, there is, there's some acronyms, some useful links, and some other stuff. So for those that want to geek out, these are all the different things, and there's a whole bunch more stuff for those that want to load the PowerPoint up.
And Jeff, are you going to send that out to those who have signed up for the program tonight?
Yeah, I can certainly send a link out to the video recording of this. And I think it's hard to send out PDF or PowerPoint slides because they have a lot of bandwidth. I mean, they're big files, so. maybe
Well,
we
I'll
have to-
send it, Jeff, I'll send it to you or as a PDF then.
Oh, okay, you can do it that way. So, yeah, as long as it's sendable, then we can just attach it to an email that everybody who signed up will get the email in the next day or so.
And okay, so I have put my contact in there and I'm available to you, but let's get to some of the questions that were on. Jeff asked about community solar. Do you know, across the state, are there some community solar operations up and running? Was that your question, Jeff?
Yeah, and actually Edith had answered it. There's a website that shows, I can send that out as a link too if anybody's interested, but there's a web page that shows the status of various projects, solar projects in the state.
One thing on the community solar projects, I mentioned that it was kind of a limited number of projects were approved. Well, the funding ran out and some of the projects had to stop, and they will be the first ones to get the money from the RECs as they come out, which is going to be shortly. So those projects that are in the queue will get the early money. So.
Sounds good. Larry, you had the next question that was in the list here about rebates for EVs. Do you want to phrase it yourself? Oh, you're on mute, my friend.
Tim, from what you were saying, it sounds like there are some rebates on EVs and home charging systems coming up.
Yes, July
But they
1st.
they aren't in effect yet. So now would not be the time to buy a solar car or an electric vehicle. Wait a few months.
Yeah, I know in the past when they've had incentive programs that the Department of Commerce Economic Opportunity had, if you did something in the year the incentives became available, you were eligible. But I wouldn't rely on that. I would wait till July 1st. I'm getting a new EV this year. So.
Thank you.
Oh, let's do what Tim does. Sounds like a plan. John, you had the next question in the chat. Do you want to go ahead and phrase it yourself?
Yeah, okay. I have been interested in trying to understand the implications of climate change on a global scale. And I know a lot of areas of the world are going to be running out of water. And there already are mass migrations of people to where there is water and agriculture and so on. So the same kind of thing's likely to happen in the US, although we're protected by 2 oceans. But I wonder if any thoughts being given to how migrations of people away from coastal areas or arid current agricultural areas that become desert moving north, how that might impact our plans for trying to get to where we need to be in Illinois for 2050.
Well, for Illinois, we actually, we're in the middle. We have a wonderful water source called Lake Michigan. We do have our challenges with weather and climate. I think what I have heard is, there will be federal programs that will support, shoreline loss, flood management during storms. And, there is programs which are more directed towards the coasts. And then there are state programs at the coasts that are dealing with that. And I know there's like emergency plans. They're actually looking at siting electric vehicle charging stations in strategic locations where floods occur, so people can readily charge their EVs and to get further inland. They're also looking at alternative fuel stations for natural gas to do the same thing. So they're looking at it. That is such a tough nut. And I know there are people talking about it, and it wasn't huge in the Illinois plan at this point, but Edith might think, the climate action plan, at some point, this is going to maybe become important. The migration of all those people who are displaced to our part of the world, which I've heard people say this is going to be the best place to be. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're in good shape right now, but it's liable to be a problem as we go forward.
Yeah, I'm thinking we'll probably put up a wall around Illinois.
Edith, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, if I can, just to add to that, I'm Edith Macker with the Mayor's Caucus. When CMAP did the population forecasts, they originally had done the greenhouse gas inventory, which is what the Climate Action Plan is based on. And that one pie chart, Tim showed so many, but not a pie chart, but a wedge chart, that factors in population growth. And there are people who do the population forecasting. And when he had that line that said, if we do nothing, that does factor in inward migration to the coast. But I will say, you know, there could be a lot more done across the Great Lakes region to plan for that. I know that people are talking about it, but I think in terms of regional collaboration, there is a group that's like the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. We're 275 Chicago area municipalities. There's a Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities initiative, which includes the mayors of the Great Lakes cities and St. Lawrence in Canada. So it's about 116 mayors that collaborate. They're doing more work on climate. They're very interested in protecting the Great Lakes. They're also talking about inward migration. So it's starting to, to get some attention, but certainly much more coordination to be done.
I think, there's the climate solution list, climate mitigation list is so deep and long. Is where do you start? And, electrifying transportation is sort of an easy one. Renewable energy is sort of an easy one. It takes time and money. Migrations, there's such a big social component and so many unknowns. So I don't know, maybe that's somewhere that we will deal with more seriously later, but I think we need to be thinking about it now, as Edith suggests. So.
I have a couple of points I do want to make, but before I do, I want to open it up. If there's anybody else here who wants to raise your hand or write the word stack in the chat, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your questions. I wanted to just say to everyone, we are so happy we passed CJA. I mean, beyond happy. It's exciting. But now that we've passed it, it's in a way we felt like, oh, okay, let's coast. But there are gas plants that are being planned to be built, which is a negative. I mean, in Springfield and down in Pembroke, there are still entities that are protesting those new entities, which will be counterproductive to all the benefits of CJA. So there's ways you can be active in that way. And also, many of you, not all of you, but many of you from the DuPage County area, we have a group called DCEC, which is the DuPage Clean Energy Coalition. And we would be very happy to connect you with people in your community. For example, my friend Kathy Franke on the call today is on the Warrenville City Council Environmental Committee. And that's not the name of it, I'm butchering it, but for lack of a better thing. And they're working on implementing some of the policies that Tim talked about today at the municipality level. And that was the chart that Tim showed us with all the arrows going to local government. It is up to us to knock on the doors of our local municipalities and say, this is what we want for our future in our own communities. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to share this with you today. And this is a kickoff. Just getting started, folks. There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I just as an example, the whole beneficial electrification process is going to roll out over the next few months. That's going to unveil another layer of answers and solutions that have to get communicated. So I think this is an ongoing process, and hopefully we can have more discussions like this. But the key is to get this into decision makers' heads so they can be impacting local policies. That's kind of my thesis here. So
yeah.
So I just want to mention that DCEC has a project they could take on this year, and that's to talk about instant solar permitting for residential projects. So if solar starts taking off like we're hoping, there's going to be a workload issue with permitting departments, and there's a National Renewable Energy Laboratory has come up with this standardized approach to review permits, and it's all done with the computers, and it's super streamlined and super effective. I think it would work well with the Soul Smart program. And I think the same people have created both of these. They call it the Solar App Plus because you could add more components to it later. But I think if we could start talking to our community officials about Solar App, I think a lot of them have already heard of it, but they're kind of, it's like maybe they're kicking the tires a little bit, but if they start hearing from community groups and from individuals, that can make a big difference because that could really lower the cost of what it takes to install solar. It reduces the permitting process from 30 days to 1 day. It's like getting a roofing permit. So why should it take 30 days? And every community has different requirements. You have to standardize the energy code and everything. That could be a challenge, but or the electrical codes, I mean to say, but that's just my little pitch that that's one easy way where we can make a big difference just by talking to our community folks about that.
So no matter what town you live in, there's probably 2 other people in that community that we could maybe connect you with. And visiting a city hall meeting, we will help train you. School board, oh my gosh, I've been working with District 200 for probably 4 years now, but I'm going back and talk to them about solar. They have 20 buildings. Come on, let's put solar on one of them. So you guys, we are the kind of the life. Yeah. So we can help make these things happen. And I'm so excited that so many of you here. Edith or Tim, do you have Jeff, any parting comments you want to summarize and make before
Did
we sign off
Catherine have a
tonight?
question? She raised her hand.
Well, I just wanted to thank Edith for being at the DuPage County Environment Committee meeting earlier this month. It was impactful. It was really important to hear what you had to say, Edith, and I'm counting on the county to sign that resolution, and I hope it happens at the next February meeting. Well, it's the board, the full county board that has to sign that, but thank you, Edith. It was a great meeting.
Thanks for that. And I'm only here because I'm a member of the Tim Milburn fan club. So I spin out these programs, and Tim's really active in our environment committee, and he's been working with us. He and I really cooked up this EV Ready idea years ago. So I worked with Tim closely, and he told me he had pulled this all together, starting with COP and the IPCC report all the way down to the Greenest Region Compact. So I'm only here to hear his pitch, and I just have to say he nailed it. So that's congratulations, Tim, for you pay attention, you take notes, and I think you did a really good job communicating it. Tim spoke yesterday at our environment committee meeting, and we had 80 representatives from around the region. We had Congressman Krishnamurthy joining us, and Tim gave a condensed version of this very accurately. So, and thanks for all the good work that you do. I am in DuPage County, by the way. I am right down the road in Winfield. So,
Thanks, Edith.
thank you.
All right. Well, if there's no further comments, we're very grateful you all being here. If you're not on the mailing list for DCEC or the River Prairie Group, contact me. My email is in the chat right now, or my phone. I don't mind either way. And let's go. We'll do this. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
Good night.
Tim. Thank you,
Thank you, Tim.
Tim, so much.
Welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you, Tim.